So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to have this talk. To everyone who's here, and Balwan, for the sort of organization here, arranging this. See, really my mission is to just spread yoga philosophy, then a proper, authentic understanding of yoga philosophy throughout for people to access it. Since this culture is primarily, in most of the world actually, is primarily focused on asana. So having said that, it's important to understand where asana comes from, what asana is, and to contextualize it in a broader framework of yoga philosophy. So I'm really excited for this, and I hope that at the end of this talk, there's something that you take away, and hopefully you become more enthusiastic. I know everyone is in different places in terms of learning yoga. Some people might really know the philosophy, some people might not. So we're just going to cater to all people here. So we're going to begin with a question, right? Should we study yoga philosophy? And if so, why? Clearly, the answer is going to be yes, right? Because that's what the talk is about. And the thesis is that studying yoga philosophy will clarify what yoga is. And it's important to clarify what yoga is because we have so many interpretations of what yoga is, right? There's so many interpretations. Everyone has their own philosophies and whatnot. And so it's important to understand where yoga is rooted, okay? And in doing so, we're going to become aware of the practices, beliefs, and worldviews that surrounded the yogis and yoginis in the past who practiced these traditions. So studying yoga will enhance our practices. It will give us a certain direction, an ideal, a goal to which we can strive, right? When you clarify what your goal is, if you guys are practitioners, right? I'm sure some of you are practitioners. So if you guys are practitioners, okay. If you guys are practitioners, it will clarify where your goal is and where you need to go and how we can enhance it in that way by studying yoga philosophy. And the method that we're going to use is I'm just going to give you an overview of Indian philosophy, right? I'm going to contextualize asana, right, in its proper historical and philosophical framework. I'm going to give you a brief history, introduce you to the 6 schools of Indian philosophy, Shad Darshana, which is what it's called, kind of give an introduction to the Vedas and the Upanishads, which I'll discuss later, give you a structure and teaching of the Yoga Sutra, and if we have time, Sankhya philosophy, okay? So it sounds like a lot, but I'm sure we can handle it. So just to introduce myself again, my name is Hemal Trivedī. I'm a graduate student at Georgetown University. I will be in September. I focus on Hindu-Christian theology and the psychology of religion. And my research interests, as I've mentioned, are Sankhya Yoga philosophy, psychology of the mind and self. And pretty much my mission here is to bridge the gap between traditional Vedic Shastra teachings and modern psychology. Bridge the gap here, create a conversation between the two, right? How to not make it only theoretical, but how can we apply it into our personal lives? So my background is I have earned 2 master's degrees in religious studies, one from Rutgers University, another one from Texas, and I have studied psychology and biology before. So you'll see these themes, based on my background. So first and foremost, we have heard of the term asana, right? From the root as, to sit, asana, right? Sitting, a seated posture, right? So yogasana, first we have to identify how are our senses coming into contact with this yoga asana thing that's going on here. We're seeing it in yoga studios. We're seeing it in books. We're seeing it sold in products and advertisements and all these different things throughout the world, right? It's important for us to keep reminding ourselves that yes, although we are seeing it all over in these yoga studios, it is rooted in India. We can take this and kind of move it over to India. And why that's important is because it's going to give us an understanding of how the people were thinking. Now take that sort of rooting in India and go back 2,000 years. Go back 2,000 years, 1,500 years, etc. And you will see that they had a certain worldview when they approached asana. They had a certain practical worldview of the belief system, what is God, what is the self, what is nature, etc. So by understanding this, right, we're going to understand our practice more. A lot of these practices are mentioned in classical Sanskrit texts like Yoga Sutra, Patanjali. I'm sure you've heard of this. Hatha Yoga, Pradipika, Yoga Vasishta, etc. So a lot of these teachings, which I'm going to discuss today, are rooted in these texts. And these texts are, some of them 500, some of them 1,000, some of them 1,500 years old. So very authentic in that way. So first, asana is a part of a holistic philosophical system, right? It's very important to understand this. When we take asana and we move it from here to India and then go back 2,000 years, roughly, right? We have to understand that the yogins viewed the world in a certain way. Now, this means they had their own metaphysics, their own nature of reality. Who am I? What is the self? What is the material world, etc.? Is there a division between the two? They had their own epistemology, meaning how do I acquire knowledge, right? If I look over there and I see a tree, how do I know if it's a tree, right? If I see smoke, is there going to be fire afterwards through inference? Should I believe in Shastra, etc.? So they have their own way of acquiring knowledge, right? They have their own ethical system, ahimsa, nonviolence, right? Many other sort of ethics and morality, how to live as an individual, right? And of course, afterlife beliefs, samsara, rebirth, that's called soteriology. So again, I urge us to look at it in such a way where we take asana, move it to India, to the ashramas in certain settings, right? Hermitages, spiritual settings, move back 2,000 years, and people were in forests practicing this. And imagine being in a forest, right? Like it's already difficult like to stay away from your phone for some time, but like being in a forest, not having any sort of technology, and then having these animals constantly being afraid of all these animals and all these different things, you're there and you're practicing. So these sort of philosophical schools and worldviews are rooted in what is known as the Vedas and the Upanishads, and we will go through this. And please do excuse me if you already know this. Everyone is at different levels, so it's important to start from the beginning. And I would ideally love to answer questions, just like, whenever someone wants to raise their hand, but because there's a decent amount of people, it's going to be tough. So we'll wait till the end. So the Vedas are the core of Hinduism, or the core of the Vedic tradition, Sanatana Dharma. Veda, from the root vid, to know, right? They are a collection of hymns, prayers, and sacrifices and praises to the Vedic gods. Many of the Vedic gods you may not hear of today. Agni, Varuna, Indra, Rudra, Vayu, Bruhaspati, right? Saraswati. You hear about her though. Some of them you don't hear about today. These gods, for a lack of a better way to put it, they're elemental gods in some way, although it's more than that. Agni, right? Agni, please, oh Agni, please transport this offering to the gods. Agni mile purohitam yajnasya devram utvijam. So that's a certain Vedic prayer, right? Varuna, the god of the ocean, and stuff like that. Indra, god of the sky. So you have this tradition of sort of Brahmins or Brahmanas and all these different classes, right? Sort of engaging in Vedic ritualism. Please provide me with progeny. Please provide me with cows. Please provide me with victory in war, etc. This is the tradition at the time, right? You have 4 Vedas, Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda. Interestingly, my last name Trivedī means one who knows the 3 Vedas. So oftentimes the last names, you can kind of see where their lineages were, their ancestors were. So we have these Vedas, these ritualistic traditional texts, right? And they're hymns and sacrifices and prayers to the gods. From this gradually emerges Indian philosophy, right? And we're slowly getting to today, but it's going to take a while, but we'll get there. So for example, a very famous mantra, the Gayatri mantra, Om Bhur Bhuva Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhyo Yo Na Prachodayat Om. So the Gayatri mantra was a mantra that is commonly said to, we can say the sun, or Savitri, right? Deity that energizes and gives one power. So the Brahmins, or many other classes for that matter, would take their sacred thread and hold it and, pray towards the sun. And that was a sort of tradition at the time. So gradually, what happens is the Vedas, within the Vedas, there's a certain group of texts called the Upanishads, right? Come here, sit, in the sense of a disciple sitting by the feet of the guru and learning. in a forest, under a tree area, right? So you start to see this Vedic ritualism go from, Gods, please give me this, please provide me with this, please give me this strength, to who am I? What is my purpose in this universe? What is the self? What is material reality? Who is God? Is God one, or is there a separate God? You start to see these philosophical questions emerge as the Vedas start to progress through time, right? Of course, the believers of the Hindu and the Vedic tradition will say the Vedas are timeless, right? They were not written, they were timeless. But of course, historians will try to date it at a certain time. But most importantly, for our sake, for our understanding here, the Vedas are transitioning from ritualism, right, to philosophical inquiry. This is the heart of Indian philosophy. This is the heart of yoga. This is the heart of Sankhya, Vedanta, all the different traditions. Name it, you talk to any Hindu today, right? They will most likely be discussing something that is rooted in the Upanishads in this way, but not directly. They're not going to quote it, they're going to say something from it. So these are some of the questions, some of the philosophical questions listed here. And there's a sort of historian who has a very interesting theory, the axial age. Around the same time as the Vedas are transitioning to the Upanishads, around the same time in other parts of the world, there is a transition from ritualism to philosophical inquiry. I think in China, Confucianism is slowly going into philosophical inquiry, in many other places as well. So the axial age is a certain philosophy there, or a theory. So again, the source of Indian philosophy comes from the Vedas and the Upanishads, right? So I'm trying to give us a sort of structure here to understand, because all this information is being thrown at us all over, whether you go on Instagram or Facebook and this, and they're talking about anything, right? So you want to try to structure it into certain teachings here. So the different philosophical schools that emerge, now having established that the Vedas were ritualistic, that the Upanishads are now philosophical, now emerge different interpretations, right? Given a room of 60-something people, 20 of them are going to think something different, the other 20 are going to think something different, and they're going to form groups, and they're going to believe in certain things and have teachers and gurus in a hierarchy, right? So you're going to have different philosophical schools that believe in different realities. So from the interpretation of the Vedas and the Upanishads emerge Shad Darshana, the 6 philosophical schools of Indian philosophy in this case. Now there are more, but we're going to just categorize them as 6 right now. So these 6 philosophical schools are known as Astika, from the verb asti, there is, right? From the root as, to be. Astika means those schools which believe and take their sort of shelter in the Vedas. Those who believe in the Vedas and accept the authority of the Vedas. They accept the authorities of the ritualistic tradition and the philosophical tradition. Because there are schools that are opposite of that. They don't accept it. But right now we're looking at those that accept it. These are the schools that, sort of modern Hindus are, it's rooted in here, their belief system. So we have Sankhya Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, Vedanta, right? So our focus today is Sankhya Yoga, the sister schools of where your practices are originated. So Sankhya primarily deals with metaphysics. By metaphysics, I mean, what is reality? Is reality material? Is reality immaterial? What does the table consist of? What do I consist of? That's metaphysics. Sankhya answered these questions, right? Had a certain worldview. Yoga takes that worldview, borrows it, and then says, let's put it into practice. Let's do something about it. So you see in the Sankhya text, they'll delineate the whole material world. People don't like reading that sometimes. People don't want to read about how like certain things interact this way, and just people get bored. Some people like it. But yoga is what I argue in a previous paper is what gives people agency. And so they take Sankhya and they apply it to their personal life in that way. Nyaya is a school of logic. It's a beautiful school. You don't want to mess with these people. You don't want to debate with these people. They will break you because they're so intelligent. They know how to argue logically and whatnot. So their belief is through argument, through logic, through reasoning, we can find the truth. That's their belief system. So they sort of set the ground for debate. How do you debate? What should you do? But later on, they do say for personal experience, like we have taught you in, I think, the second or third chapter, we have taught you the logic, but now for personal experience, we hand over the torch to yoga, the yoga school. Vaisheshika is another metaphysical school that is different from Sankhya. They have different ways of looking at the world. Mimamsa is a ritualistic school, the relationship between sound and mantras and chanting and so on and so forth. And Vedanta is probably the most popular school, although Sankhya and yoga are also popular. Vedanta, we have a lot of traditions here. The Krishna movement, the Swaminarayana movement, Shiva movement, etc. So they sort of put things together. But here it's important to understand that all these schools have their own texts. And again, texts they were not written down, they were memorized. This tradition was an oral tradition. This tradition was, memorized and with a sort of perfection. The way that the gurus taught the disciples, they wouldn't allow for any sort of mistake, any sort of sound mistake at all. So Sankhya has the Sankhya Karika, Yoga has the Yoga Sutra, Nyaya has the Nyaya Sutra, so on and so forth. The other schools, the Nastika schools, there is not, na asti, there is not. So they don't put their sort of beliefs, they don't base their beliefs on God necessarily. They don't base their beliefs on the Vedas. They kind of move away from the Vedas. They say, hey, look, we disagree with a lot of what the Vedas are teaching and whatnot, and so we're moving away. But the Astika schools, they stuck to it. So the Jaina school, Bauddha, Buddhists, right? Buddhism, because Buddhism the Theravada Buddhism doesn't believe that there's a self. There is no soul, right? Charvaka is a very funny, humorous materialist. He would be the modern atheist. Ajivika, those who don't believe in free will. Things are just happening as it is. You have no control over it. So imagine the environment of all these different people debating each other. This is the truth. That's the truth. That's what it is, So around 800 BCE to 200 CE, we can say that was a time where these debates were really going on. Of course, they still do go on, but no, it's not, it's not as intense as it was back then. Texts were memorized, again, oral tradition, and people were arguing. Gurus would debate gurus. And I hear that one professor told me that if a guru lost, then he would lose his disciples to the other guru. So your integrity and your authenticity depended on your sort of knowledge and how well you are grounded in this practice. Again, Indian philosophy is so unique because it's not only conceptual. You have to practice it. You're not sitting in a chair thinking about it. You're thinking about it, but you're also practicing. And that's the core here. So now we're going to go into sutra literature. Sutras are very condensed statements. If you look at other texts like the Bhagavad Gita, you will get shlokas, very long ones. Dharmakshetre, Kurukshetre, Samaveta, Yutsavaha, very long ones, right? Sort of poems, poetic. Sutras are very small. Pramana, Viparya, Vikalpa. It's very, very short and condensed. Atha Yoga Anushasanam, that's it. Why it's that way? It's because for memorization purposes. The guru would pass on the sutras to the disciple, and then they would talk about it. So it's for memorization purposes. There are almost no verbs in there. So it'll just be like, yoga begins. Yoga is that. This is that. So it's very difficult to translate it on your own. That's a sutra. So yeah, okay, let's go to the next one. So just to give you a sort of idea of what you're looking at. When you look at a text, what are you looking at, right? When you look at a text, first of all, the sutra, let's say the Yoga Sutra, right? It represents the teachings of yoga. We can say that right then and there. So you look at the sutras 195, 196, and you can confidently say this is what the yogins believe, right? Then underneath, you have what is called the bhashya, commentary. Commentary, a bunch of commentators, whether they're philosophers or practitioners, they expand on the sutras because the sutras are so cryptic. they're so cryptic, very difficult to understand. So what the commentators do is they expand on it. This word means that. That word means that. Oh, when Patanjali is saying this word, actually he means this. So when we study yoga philosophy, or when we try to understand yoga, right? Even when we look at some of the Krishnamacharya, Patabi Joyce, all these people, they have studied these philosophies, and they have read the bhashyas and the commentaries. So looking at the format, you see a sutra, Atha Yoga Anushasanam, right? You're looking at a modern commentary, you'll see the translation underneath. Now the teachings of yoga commence. Underneath, you'll see the bhashya. Yoga Samadhi. Yoga is samadhi. On and on, like paragraphs. It'll clarify it. So imagine just having Atha Yoga Anushasanam. It says now yoga begins, right? If you look at that, you're like, oh yeah, okay, yoga begins. But it's so deep. They go on for pages and pages and pages and pages explaining the meaning of every word. It's very deep, the literature in here. So here's the dilemma. The dilemma is this. Yoga is depicted as physical postures, right? Out of 195 to 196 sutras, only 2 or 3 of them are about asana. Only 2 or 3 are about asana, physical postures. This poses a huge dilemma here. 192, right, verses or sutras, what are they about? Why are we taking these 3 and then saying, this is yoga, let me get my mat, let me go do this and go do this? No disrespect to it, but why are we not, what's going on with the 192? It's important to elucidate this, right? I'm sure many of you agree with this, maybe you have experienced it. But the other 192 sutras are about intense meditation, discipline, devotion to a higher power. Actually, God is involved in this. We'll see how God is defined. Celibacy, non-violence, sort of cognitive, behavioral, positive thinking, right? Tons of other topics are there. And asana is only one component of it. Actually, 1% of the text is asana. It's wild, So okay. Now, I want to clarify one thing before we begin with the Yoga Sutra. Sankhya and yoga, right? We're going to look at metaphysics. So what is reality? When we try to ask a question today, like, okay, how do I get over this addiction? How do I get over this problem, right? You have many ways of approaching it. But the way that you approach it, the way that you answer it, really, if you think about it, depends on what you think your body is. If you think your body is, composed of blood vessels, cells, capillary tissues, all these sort of things, then you'll answer it scientifically. You'll say that, oh yeah, well, okay, in the brain, this chemical is released, and then this pathway is reinforced, and then this happens and that happens. And you find a solution according to that, right? If you believe in chakras, if you believe in other sort of nadis and kundalini, you'll answer it according to that. That's your implicit metaphysical framework that's going on in your mind, what you think you are composed of. So we have to understand, what did the yogins think they were composed of, right? We can't project our own thing onto them. We have to see, what did they think? So for them, their belief system was that there's only 2 fundamental things in all of reality. One is Purusha, infinite, changeless, eternal consciousness, pure consciousness, unchanging. It cannot change. Nothing happens within it, right? It's this blissful soul, as one can say, the observer, okay? The seer. And that's what you are, according to yoga and Sankhya. That's what you are. Prakriti, on the other hand, is constantly changing material nature, right? Whether it's the car, the table, the tree, and your body, and in Sankhya and yoga, your mind is also material. Your mind is also material. The chitta, the manas, buddhi, ahankara, the chitta, the mind is material. It's not this Abrahamic sort of Descartes sort of, God has given you a spiritual mind. It's not that. It's only Purusha that's spiritual. And Prakriti and rest of material nature is changing, and you are observing it. You're observing it. But you're drawn in, and you don't realize your true nature, according to Sankhya and yoga. So, Yoga Sutra 1.2. This is the most important sutra of yoga, the yoga school of Indian philosophy, I would argue. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, right? I'm sure many of you have heard this countless times, right? Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Now, yoga, the term that is to be defined from the root yuj, to meditate, not to yoke or to combine or to merge. It's on to meditate. Actually, that's the root's meaning. There's two different roots. Yoga is nirodha, from the root nirud, to suppress, to block, to inhibit, right? Nirud, it's actually a tough term. Yoga is the nirodha of the vrittis, of the fluctuating thoughts, the activities, the mental activities of the chitta, of the material mind. Yoga is the cessation, or yoga is the stoppage of the fluctuations of the material mind. That's how we can define it. Vrit is the root of vritti, to turn, to revolve. Chit, right, from chitta. So we understand these terms based off of the root. We cannot just assign any meaning like yoga is pure bliss in this. Like, I mean, you can, but there are certain ways to really define it in that way. So as we're learning in yoga philosophy, right now, we're actually diving into what yoga is. So we have these three terms here. Chitta Vritti Nirodha, right? Stoppage, suppression, stilling, vritti, fluctuations, right? Mental activity, and chitta, material mind. Now, nirodha is not the suppression in the sense of the Freudian suppression where you suppress something and then it comes back stronger. It's not that way, because that word has a negative connotation. But nevertheless, we have to use that word, because what we'll learn later is you're not stopping the thoughts, the vrittis. The vrittis are your fluctuations in your thoughts, right? I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to go there. Why did that person say that to me? Oh my God, what am I going to do in my future? Oh, I'm so sad about this in the past. These are all vrittis. And the observer, the Purusha, is watching all of it happen. Infinite, changeless, eternal Purusha is watching all of material nature do its thing. So you're not suppressing it. You're really practicing in a way where they no longer emerge anymore, and you go into a state of meditative flow, which we will go into that. I wish I could check on you guys to see what's going on. Okay, good. This is a lot, right? It's just like, can't even see the audience, but it's okay. This is how Zoom is going to be, but I'm happy nevertheless to do this. But yeah, so sutras also, they're very sort of chronological.
Hemal,
Yeah.
we can take 1 minute break.
Sure.
And kind of maybe try to connect this knowledge to, like, these are mostly yoga practitioners,
Sure.
or if they have like very quick question, someone.
Yeah.
And then later, like, you have lots of wealth of knowledge that how we can, like, easily we can kind of keep learning from you time to time, or kind of so if anyone have something like light question, not too heavy, please go ahead for Hemal.
Meaning of life, you can ask that. I'm just kidding.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Have you heard about the text that supposedly was lost that Krishnamacharya talks about? I think it's called Karunta.
I haven't.
Okay. Supposedly some lost book that was written on papyrus and whatever, and where he got a lot of his yoga from. I was just curious.
Yeah, Krishnamacharya went to the Himalayas and studied under a guru, right? Or no?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then he read this whole book, and he shared this book with Patabi Joyce as well, all the information. And then somebody else said, well, where can I find this book? And they told him to go to some library, but it wasn't there. And so I guess it's lost, or we don't know.
Right. I see. I mean, it could be. Yeah, I haven't heard of it. Thank you for telling me. If you could,
Okay.
tell me the name of it again and through like the chat or something.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks.
I have a question pertaining to this text that you're going over. If Purusha is the soul or the pure consciousness, what is the buddhi?
Very good question. Buddhi, we're gonna, if we have time, we'll go over later on, but the buddhi is a specific section of the mind. So the chitta right? The chitta, the material mind in yoga, we can argue that it's composed of three things in Sankhya: buddhi, ahankara, and manas. And so if we have time, I'll get to that. And it's a very important concept that you brought up.
Yes, it's confusing. So I thought maybe you're very clear in the way you're describing this. So
Thank you.
I thought maybe you can clarify it.
Yeah, if we can get to, let's see, what is it? We have time. How much time do we have? This is to 8:30 then? Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna try to get to it, and I'm gonna, if we don't, just ask me again, and we'll get to it. But right now we're just looking at the word chitta, just material mind, very generally. We're not even going deeply into it, but that's a good question.
I think Hemal continue, and
Okay.
we can take another break.
Sure. So now, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the suppression of the changing states of the mind. The next one, Sutra 1.3, tada drashtu svarupe vasthanam, right? When the goal of yoga is attained, right? When the sort of vrittis of the mind are stilled or suppressed, then the observer abides in its own nature. Now, what does this mean? Try to imagine that here is this circular observer. There's an observer here, and in front of it, there's a filter, which is your mind, which is your particular mind that you have, according to the school, have had for many lifetimes that, keeps transmigrating over and over again. So here you have all these memories and impressions of everything of this mind, this filter, and this consciousness, which is your true nature, is seeing the world through this filter, right? And in the filter, there's thoughts and fluctuations and all these things that are happening, right? So you have to still that. Otherwise, you're constantly absorbed in that nature. And so what happens is when you still that, the mind dissipates and the observer abides in itself. Avasthanam, stha, to remain or to stand in. So it stays in itself. Swarupe means its own form. And drashtra is the sort of seer, the observer. That's the goal of yoga. You're trying to disengage from the material mind by kind of shutting it down in some way, by your practices and lifestyle. So that's that. Then you have Sutra 1.4, which is vritti sarupyam itaratra. Otherwise, you're completely absorbed in the fluctuations of the mind. So there's only two states that a person could be in. The person could be in complete meditation, where the observer is abiding in its own nature, or the person is completely lost in their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions and sensations. They're completely absorbed in that false identity. So vritti sarupyam itaratra. Otherwise, sarupyam, identification, the same sort of identification with vritti, with the fluctuations. So if I have a thought like, hey, this person said this to me, why did this happen? Or why am I upset by this, right? I identify with that. So my name is Hemal, I'm a student, I'm Indian, I'm this, and this has happened. There's so much identification happening in that you go deep into it. That's sort of the condition that everyone is in, according to Patanjali. So yeah, these are the four main verses of yoga. So yoga is rooted in this philosophy right here. So now I'm just gonna, this one, I just want to show how, and again, no stress. You don't have to retain all of this now. I'm just going into it. You just say, hey, this is what's out there. So the next logical question is, okay, you're telling me that I have to suppress the fluctuations of the mind. Okay, the next logical question is, what are the fluctuations of the mind? What are the vrittis, right? So pramana, viparyaya, vikalpa, nidra, smrutayaha. The five types of fluctuation of the mind are right knowledge, error, imagination, deep sleep, and memory. So Patanjali states that all of your thoughts that you have fall into either one of these categories. Either you're acquiring knowledge, you're looking at something saying this is that, you're looking at something and thinking of it as something other than what it is. Your imagination means concepts. So if I say table, there's nothing behind that word. It's an empty concept. But oftentimes the way that we treat that word is as if that table is there behind, the physical table is there behind that word. Even if I say Hemal, like my own name, or you say your own name, you think that object is there, but all words are empty. which means that you got to get away from concepts. When you're in meditation, you have to get away from concepts. You have to break away from it. But our entire society is built off of identifying concepts. What's your name? What do you do? You know, what's your work? What's your profession? All concepts, right? Stacking on it. Yoga is trying to get away from this in some way, which makes it difficult, because you'll later see that yoga is primarily for those who retreat to the forest, primarily for those. And we'll go into that in a little bit. But yeah, deep sleep is another vritti that we don't need to go into too much, but it's a sort of memory. We'll go into, well, maybe if needed. Memory is very important. Memory is everything that we've accumulated that emerges in our mind that makes us think of the past or fear the future. So everything we think of falls into these 5 categories, according to Patanjali. I think it's brilliant. I mean, 2,500 years ago, someone's looking within and then coming up with these sort of categories of what the mind is. Are you serious? Like, I feel like most people today like won't even be able to. I'm just saying, like, this is amazing. So now we move to the second chapter. Huge jump. We're skipping like 50 sutras right now, but it's important here. Now, Sutra 2.3 states the obstacles to yoga. As a practitioner, what are your obstacles? Psychological obstacles, not necessarily asana-based obstacles. Avidya, smita, raga, dvesha, bhiniveshaha, panchakleshaha. The kleshas, from the root klish, to afflict or to harm, right? The kleshas are the obstacles to yoga. And there are 5, pancha, right? Avidya, ignorance. Avidya, from the root vid, to know, with the prefix avid, to not know, right? To not really know something well. Avidya means when you identify with the false self. When you are the Purusha, but your mind identifies with the mind-body complex. That's avidya. You think that you project eternality on something that is temporary. You project happiness, pleasure on something that is full of pain, right? You project purity on something that is impure. That's avidya. You don't see things properly. You identify with your false body-mind complex. Asmita is an intensification of that. So for instance, if I identify with this body-mind complex, asmita, ego, means I'm Hemal, I'm a student, I'm a teacher, I'm this. And so based on my identification, my behaviors in the world will follow based on who I think I am in that way. Raga, desire, right? From the root ranj, to color something in a certain way. Raga is important here. Desire. Our desires stop us from yoga oftentimes, from fulfilling the goal in some way, and we'll see how. Dvesha, from the root dvish, to it's a sort of affliction here too. Aversion. Desire and aversion are 2 sides of the same coin. You know, when you really want something, you're also afraid of not getting it. You know, when you're afraid of not getting something, you kind of want something else. So, and abhinivesha, clinging to life and the fear of death. So the fear of death really interferes with the yogin's journey. In fact, ironically, in some way, when you're practicing yoga, you're getting over the fear of death, because it's argued that you are identifying who you really are, because you can only have the fear of death when you falsely identify with the body-mind complex. So the Yoga Sutra states that all the way from like the smartest scholar to an earthworm, all have abhinivesha, all are afraid of death, all think, let me keep living, let me not die. And this klesha, this obstacle to the path of yoga that actually exists in your mind, they say, it blocks you. So let's understand raga dvesha in terms of applying it, right? Sukhanushai ragaha. Raga, desire, comes from previously experienced pleasure. This is brilliant, right? Whatever desires you have, chances are most of them emerge from previously experienced pleasures. If I crave pizza today, chances are in the past I've experienced the pleasure of eating pizza. If I crave anything, whatever it is, you know, any sort of pleasure it is, most likely, in most cases, I've experienced it before. So my memory emerges and comes up and says, hey, you've enjoyed this before. You bring your awareness to it, and then you say, yeah, I want it now. and that desire creates from there. It's a very important fundamental framework for understanding addictions and how to stop certain things. And more importantly, for instance, when I ate pizza before, I was in my apartment once, and I was walking, and I just opened the cabinet and closed the cabinet. I sat down. I was like, I want some pizza. And I was like, wait a minute, why am I craving pizza all of a sudden? So let me retrace my steps. I went back, I opened up the cabinet, and I noticed that there was a red crushed pepper thing right there. So under my awareness, I saw this red crushed pepper thing. I didn't acknowledge it, but my mind acknowledged it, and the very next thought was a memory. I mean, a memory that came up that was like, oh, you enjoyed red crushed pepper, you associated that with pizza, and you enjoyed it, and then now you should go get it again. I'm sure if we pay really close attention to our minds and bring that awareness inwards, you can kind of trace where your habits are forming. So that's that. And dukkhanushayira dveshaha is same thing. If you, I have an aversion to sort of like balloons popping. It's like really loud and stuff. So before, when I would hear balloons pop, I would get scared as a kid, right? So even today, I see a balloon, I'm like, oh, I don't want to be near that, It's previously experienced pain. So these things sort of guide your behavior. You avoid certain things, and then you seek certain things. The more you seek desire, you identify with the body. You identify with the body-mind complex. You reinforce the body-mind complex every time you fulfill a desire out of craving. And every time you are averse to something, you also re-identify over and over again. That's the whole idea here. So it's not like, all right, tomorrow I'm going to become desireless. But we have to understand what is desirelessness in yoga. So, yeah. So Sutra 1.12 states, Abhyasa Vairagyabhyam Tannirodha. So how do you still the mind? How do you stop the fluctuations of the mind? How do you achieve the goal of yoga? Patanjali says, Abhyasa Vairagyabhyam, through practice and detachment. Through Abhyasa and Vairagya. Practice and detachment are the ways to master yoga. And this includes asana, which we will see gradually, right? So we'll go into what practice is, but even the Sankhya Karika, another text, outlines how do you overcome a certain desire that you have. So the first step is make sure that your senses are no longer contacting sense objects. So if you crave something a lot and you know that it's not helping you, the first step according to Sankhya and Yoga is do not allow your senses to contact those objects. So, let's use a rudimentary example. If you are addicted to chocolate and there's a chocolate store, just don't go in that direction. It's not avoiding it. It's avoiding it for a reason, because you need to stop letting the senses contact the sense objects. That's where it begins in one way. The second thing is you have to assess which of your desires are strong or weak. You have to have a sort of awareness to your desires. And as you keep avoiding or sort of staying away from the senses contacting the sense objects, the desires are isolated in your mind only by memory. And that's the only battle you have to fight after that, your memory, as opposed to you constantly reinforcing the thing over and over again. And gradually, according to Sankhya, if you then fight the battle of your mind, which is with your memory through yoga, you'll be free of that desire gradually. So it's a sort of process, but that's just, letting you know that it's there at least. Just a clarification, tatra sthito yatno bhyasaha. Practice is the effort in attaining steadiness. This is very important. Abhyasa, how does Patanjali define practice? Practice is the effort that you put in for steadiness, sthiti, right? It's not, getting a fit body, or it's not, becoming, extremely courageous, or it's not becoming successful in your career, etc. Practice, according to yoga, is steadiness, to move away from the ups and downs of life, the sort of mental vicissitudes that you have, to get control of that and stability in your life. So every practice that a yogin strives for should be rooted in the desire for stability, in the desire for sthiti. So it's very clear here what he says. So when you practice yoga, sort of the suggestion here is, or actually suggestion, it's more than a suggestion, it's what the sutra is saying. It's, hey, remember that you're practicing today for steadiness. That's your goal here. So again, your understanding the yoga philosophy will help you see what the goals are, based on yoga, so you don't really get lost in that way. And the next verse, Satu dirgha kala nairantarya satkara sevito drudha bhumihi. Practice, abhyasa, is dirgha kala, done for a long time. Practice, so first of all, drudha bhumihi, drudha, firm, bhumi, earth, ground. A practice that is firm in its ground, firmly rooted, is dirgha kala, must be done for a long time, like years. Nairantarya, uninterrupted. It has to be consistent every day for a long time. And satkara, with respect and honesty, right? So it's not like, oh yeah, I gotta go do this today, haha, I don't really feel like doing it. It's like, I'm going to do this, I have respect for this, it's going to give me something, and sort of giving it your attention, going into it. So they're saying, he's making just a very objective statement here. By the way, the sutras are not judging anybody. No one's being judged, right? No one's saying one should ethically, and later on we'll see ethics, but no one's really forcing anyone to do anything. Patanjali has a take it or leave it mentality. He's saying, here's what it is. If you want to do it, do it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. But strive for it if you want, right? So if you want to practice, you have to do it for a long time. It has to be uninterrupted. It has to be done with a sort of devotion to that practice. Now we're going to go into detachment. We hear this term like, okay, maybe I should be detached. Maybe I should kind of pull away. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should be dispassionate towards something. It's a very common thing that we kind of get to when we feel hurt about something, right? And so Sutra 1.15, Drushtanusravika Vishaya Vitrushnasya Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam. Vairagya, dispassion, viraga, right? Not sort of desire, opposite of desire, right? Dispassion is when the mind is no longer controlled or influenced by the objects outside. That's the ideal of yoga, where when you enter a room and you're full of all of these things that could be there, someone who you're attracted to, some food that's there, some, wealth or whatever it is, that these sort of desires that are there, food, right? You're not influenced by it. It doesn't affect you. It doesn't sway you. That's vairagya according to yoga, right? That is very intense. You're starting to see a theme here in yoga where a lot of these ideals are intense, sort of, here's what it is, right? And I'm going to address the question gradually. How do we, who maybe aren't, unless all of you are like really Patanjali yogins and you're already, yeah, I've been in the forest already for 15 years. What are you talking about? But unless you guys have already done this, how do we really address this? What do we do, So I'll address that. But again, vairagya is very important here. Drushta, the objects that are seen, you're not affected by it. It doesn't control you. And that in that case, we have to be honest with ourselves. How many things control us, our phone and all these certain things that are out there. And then the next verse, para vairagya, a higher detachment. Tat param purusha khyater guna vaitrushnyam. There is a higher form of detachment than just the detachment that was mentioned before. Imagine that. The higher form of detachment is the detachment from the fundamental root of material nature, prakriti. So, for instance, I can say that I'm detached from wanting that car. I can say I'm detached from, being attracted to that person. Or I can say I'm detached from eating this food. But these are different forms. But a yogin who has true knowledge knows that all these different forms are actually part of the same thing. The physical body and the mind of the individual whom I am attracted to, the body of the car, the body of the table, it's all prakriti, all matter. So the yogin sees this. The yogin sees, I don't see different forms, like the really elevated yogin. I don't see different forms. I see these forms all as the same. They're rooted in prakriti, material nature, very subtle. And because of that, and also prakriti is constantly changing. I am Purusha, eternal. Prakriti is constantly changing. So anything that I do, any sort of emotion or anything that I put in something that is constantly changing is only going to produce pain, is only going to produce dissatisfaction to some degree eventually, right? So Patanjali says the yogin sees dosha, a fault in material nature, right? And so the yogin detaches as a result of seeing fault. But there's one more key point here. Purusha khyatehe. From the perception of Purusha, only this realization emerges. You can't force yourself to come to this realization by constantly becoming desireless. You have to experience the self. You have to experience Purusha in meditation. When you experience the bliss of Purusha in meditation, the desires fall away naturally. And you see the flaws in things, you know? I mean, right now it's gonna be like, hey man, I don't want to hang out with you because you're constantly changing and I don't want to get hurt. And it's not gonna work, right? So it's kind of like you have to, the person is gonna get offended, but I mean, you have to really experience the Purusha and you have to, you sort of see it that way. That's what Patanjali is saying here. So that answers the question. There is a certain question. Do I like become desireless, or it's like, no, just keep trying to meditate and experience the Purusha while being aware of your weaknesses and your desires and bringing awareness to that. So there's that. Do you want to take a 1 minute break to sort of ask a question? Yeah, or?
It will be good. Thanks.
I have a question.
Sure.
How do you perceive Purusha? How can you perceive Purusha when everything is guna?
Yeah.
Like you can't detach from guna because we're made of guna. Yes?
Yes, that's a good question.
It's not outside of us.
There is a plot twist later in the Sankhya Karika that says that you were never bound to begin with. There's a plot twist. It's an illusion. So the binding is an illusion, but you can only do that through meditation. You can accomplish it through meditation. So you're not actually bound. But that's kind of like, you kind of asked me the ending to a movie, but that's okay. But yeah, it's not the mind that's perceiving it. It's the mind that's shutting itself down, and then the Purusha is, so the thing that's feeling it after is no longer you anymore. Like you're not feeling it through your body. Supposedly, it's just Purusha, and that's it. And it's a blissful feeling, but it's not you as your name as who's feeling it. But yeah. It's wild.
So is that just a sattvic state then?
It's beyond the gunas, supposedly. It's beyond the gunas. How do you say? Is that a sattvic state? What do you mean by that question?
Because we're always trying to become sattvic, right? Because we're always swirling through our three gunas. And this is saying that we kind of, I don't know what the word for it is. We kind of like float above that.
Well,
right?
Yes, that can only.
Okay, go ahead.
That can only happen if you make your buddhi sattvika. It's the sort of buddhi question you were asking before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if the intellect, we'll discuss it. If the intellect is not of sattvika nature and it's covered by tamas, then you will never experience this feeling. You'll never experience it. You can't. So the buddhi has to be made very clear, light. Your sort of asana needs to be instilled, pranayama, all this stuff needs to be controlled. Then the buddhi is refined, and then it reflects the nature of the Purusha, and then you achieve it. But
I see.
But yeah, that we'll discuss. Yeah, very awesome.
So
I have a question.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm a little confused by what is constantly changing on that last line of that display.
Yes.
I know you said the words, but I was having trouble understanding more what you meant.
No problem. What is changing is prakriti, material nature. Material nature includes all the physical things around you, and it also includes your body and your mind as well. So there's a division, a dual nature to Sankhya philosophy, where there's the immaterial self, and the material reality. And material reality is constantly changing. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
So if you could imagine a spider and a spider web, sort of like out of the spider is like not releasing any web, then boom, a huge web comes out. And that's everything around you. and then eventually it comes back in, right? This is all material nature. And in that web, there's different souls or purushas that are in there, bound, but they're not really bound. It's a complex philosophy. And that's why I love that you're asking these questions, because now we're starting to ask more of these sort of philosophical questions, because at the root of our practices, these questions are there. So material nature is constantly changing. People's emotions, their personalities are changing. People are getting older, things like that.
So when you say the yogi sees all things as, can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
Sees all material nature as flawed. So how does that hold up? Is it seeing it as flawed because it's always changing, or there's a beginning and an end naturally to material substances, including our bodies? And is it that's why it's flawed? Like, why is it flawed? I thought nature was perfect, and the incoming and outgoing is perfect with nature. So why would the yogi see it as flawed? And also, is when we detach from something, isn't it that you have to love everything 100%, but be detached from it at the same time? So how does that play into nature is perfect as it is?
I'll take on the first.
But our understanding of nature is what's flawed.
Right. So, okay, that's interesting. So let's take on the first question, and then these are very so the first nature for your premise here is that everything is perfect. So where is this premise coming from?
Because everything that's happening is happening without us. So which means it's been going for 12 billion years, 13 billion years. How do we say it's flawed? Why? Why are we making that assumption?
Right.
Even if we are a yogi.
Yeah. That's the word dosha. I mean, is it means flaw in this case, in the sense of, because it's constantly changing, it's going to interfere with your progress, because like you said, it's your perception of it. So yeah, it's not necessarily that material nature itself is flawed. It's the way that the yogi is attached.
Our perception of it is flawed.
Right. Your perception,
that's better
attachment to it. Exactly.
That's better for me. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Material nature is always changing. Exactly. And it's just doing its thing. Yeah. Totally separate, because we're not making any judgments on the world. Definitely not. We're not looking past a tree and calling it ugly or beautiful or anything like that. It's just a tree. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So the connection thing.
Thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah. And we'll answer the second one after, but that's a very good clarification. Thank you for that. Yeah. So yeah, now we're going to go into Ashtanga Yoga. Ashtanga, the 8-limb path, right? So many of you have heard this. This is also the core and the sort of the heart of Indian, yoga philosophy. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. So real quick, the yamas and the niyamas are these sort of promises or vows that are to be taken for the yogi. We'll go into it. Asana, we know, are the postures. Pranayama is breath control, breath restraint. Pratyahara, sort of like separating yourself from the outer world and going within. Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, I'll explain it. So we'll go into it. So Sutra 2.30, this is actually something important here. So Ahimsa Satya Steya Brahmacharya Parigraha Yamaha. So this is commonly what's debated in the yoga community, and this is where it becomes really controversial, right? So ahimsa, non-violence, is directly stated in the Yoga Sutra as not inflicting any pain to any human or animal or any being to the best of your ability. Not even best of your ability, just not doing it, right? Through your speech and through the way that you act at things that you do, you just don't hurt beings. This includes animals. So by nature, a yogin is a vegetarian or a vegan by nature here. And Satya, truth telling, you tell the truth, right? You be honest. And later on, they have a sort of story to explain what happens when nonviolence and truth conflict, what happens when you have to tell the truth. But it's kind of painful for people. There's a story we can discuss later. So truth telling, asteya, not stealing, right? It's not trying to take things from people. Brahmacharya, this is another controversial one. Celibacy is required in the path of yoga. This freaks people out. right? This really freaks people out. People start like all this cognitive dissonance starts to emerge. Well, if I'm married and this happens like a few times, I think I'm still a yogin. Hey, look, no judgment, but Patanjali, we'll see it. It's required here, right? And so I'll explain what is our relationship with something that has all these ideals. What do we do with that? And finally, aparigraha, not wanting anything. So not really wanting things in a certain way. That's the yogin sort of mentality here. So we'll go into that. So here's a very important verse in understanding yoga. I'll just move it here. Jati desha kala samaya anavichinnaha sarva bhauma mahavratam. The yamas that we just mentioned, right? The 5 yamas are the great vow, mahavratam. They're the great vow, sarva bhauma. They're universal. And they are jati desha kala samaya anavichinnaha. They are not restricted to your circumstance, place, and time. Right after mentioning the yamas, Patanjali says it right here. It doesn't matter what your situation is. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what time period you're from, right? These 5 yamas are the great vow and you must follow them if you're a yogin, right? It's very strict.
Yeah, but if that's to happen, then the human race will not be there anymore if everybody has to become celibate.
Right, I'm going to address that. People freak out about this. You want to hear
Just saying.
That's why the yogic path, it was not for everyone, right? It was for the forest dwellers, the people who renounced work, they renounced sexual activity, they renounced marriage, they renounced everything, and they went to become a yogi, right, in the forest. But what we have to do is, and I'll explain, is that we have to learn from it in some way, right? We're obviously not all going to live. The human race will not continue. So anyway, this is a great vow according to Patanjali, right? So it needs to be sort of acknowledged here that yoga is strict. Yoga is exclusive in some way. Sorry. So what is the meaning? What is the meaning for us, right? The goals are high. So do we just say, hey, I can't be a yogin? Do I just forget about it and just do whatever I want? No, that's not really the case. What I would argue is just notice the ideal. Pay respect in sort of integrity, give integrity to the text, like let the text have its own integrity, right? But adjust and strive to that ideal to the best of our ability, right? So don't try to, because what's happening is practitioners are twisting the text, right? So someone's about to say so. Okay. So practitioners are sort of twisting the text. Are you clapping?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. I love hearing this. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. So, so they're twisting it. So then what will happen is it's because of cognitive dissonance. If you like Leon Festinger's psychological, if you tell a smoker that, hey, smoking is going to kill you, they're going to create like 5 different reasons as to why it won't, or something like that. It happens. We do that all the time. So in the same way, if you tell a person who thinks they're a yogin that, hey, celibacy is required, they're going to be like, no, well, Patanjali means sometimes. No, it doesn't. Look at the next verse. What does it say? So what I would say is, because we're all trying to get the fruits of this text or certain yogic practices, just understand what the ideals are, strive to what you can do and what you really can't do. But at the same time, be honest with yourself and say, hey, I can't reach Patanjali's ideals. But not say, here are Patanjali's ideals. My ideals are Patanjali's ideals. And that's important because that's going to enhance your practice. You're being honest with yourself in that way. Does that make sense? I don't know. We don't.
Yes.
Yeah, this is all I'm saying in that way. So I'm not saying definitely do not, hey, do not abandon your families. Do not go into the forest. Do not, whatever, do whatever you want, But here are the sort of, just notice the ideal. That's all. Okay.
Can one also say then that that's his interpretation of it, because Patanjali also just interpreted this Yoga Sutras that he put out from the text that was there before?
We can say that, but I think that, so yeah, Patanjali is a compiler, right?
Correct, yes.
I think that we can say that anyone is an interpreter of anything in the sense of we can stretch it. Like in my opinion, I understand what you're saying. I think that you can say that even if I write a book, I'm an interpreter of the book that I just wrote. And even if I come up with something, I'm an interpreter of the thing that I just came up with. Fair enough.
Correct. Yes.
If you
Yes.
write a book and someone steals your book for plagiarism and then says, hey, you're just an interpreter of it, what are you going to say?
Yeah.
So it's going to be a problem. So in that sense, like I think Patanjali is an authoritative figure. He's there. He's a practitioner, and also he's compiling all the different things. So it's not only him who said. So first of all, brahmacharya, and if you go into the celibacy reason, there's commentators after commentators, like thousand years of commentators saying it's required. So then you're not seeing anyone except for people in the past 50 years saying, hey, no, we can have sex as much as we want. It's no problem because yoga is this. So you start to see fishy things going on here. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's just good to remember that he also interpreted the information, and like anyone else, like I hear what you're saying. He put the ideals really high, and of course, like everybody is going to attain somewhere different within that level. But just to know that he also interprets the information, and he also is just manipulating the stuff which we just talked about before, that everything on this earth, everything that you see, that you can touch, you can feel, everything has a beginning and an end, and our perception of those things affects how we will write about it or talk about it.
Yeah, let's discuss.
At the end of the day, it's important for people to understand that everybody has this intelligence, which you talked about in the beginning. We can also call it pure awareness. You had a different name that you used, but it's literally pure awareness. We are all this pure awareness, and we are having an experience of everything else. But when yoga, ultimately with yoga asana, which I think you also covered, with yoga asana, we can try to get an experience that takes us to that stillness that we are. Then we can become aware of all these things which you talked about this whole time, which creates experience, likes and dislikes, and all the stuff that we are going through as human beings. But if you come back to that, you are that pure intelligence. That pure intelligence is going to help you to get to a place of peace. And perhaps it's the way through how Patanjali said. But I think ultimately everybody inside of us, we all have that pure intelligence that can guide us, because every person is different, and they're going to find a different way to that. And ultimately death, of course, gives us that.
Okay,
That's
so
just my interpretation of it.
I totally understand. Yeah, thank you for your interpretation. I think that let's discuss this afterwards. Second, I am a teacher of yoga philosophy according to Patanjali, so I stay rooted in this text and these traditions. So I'm not going to speak about experience, modern sort of experiences that other people have or whatever it is. And I'm going to stick in this lecture, I'm going to stick to what the text is saying. Let's have a discussion afterwards about this. And also, I would not say that Patanjali is an interpreter. These verses came out of his brain, right? So let's discuss this afterwards. Let's have these discussions afterwards. So yeah, I would happily debate you afterwards. So let's go into asana. Okay, so we have a little bit of time left. So asana, sthira sukham asanam, Sutra 2.46. Asana is steady and pleasing. So according to the Yoga Sutra here, again, there's this ideal asana that's done. When the asana requires less effort, when effort is minimized, and you're complete, like kind of like who that individual, I'm sorry, I don't know her name, whenever she said something, you're absorbed in asana, right? Whenever asana, the effort is minimized and you're absorbed in eternality, your mind is like in something, you're in a flow, that's asana. So according to the Ashtanga Yoga, the third limb, that's asana, is not you sort of putting your effort into it, because that's you trying to get to it. Once you hit that perfect pose where it's sort of easy and pleasing, and your body is light, that's asana, right? So that's a sort of striving mechanism here to reach that. So yeah, so asana is supposed to be steady and pleasing, and everything up to that point is your effort, tivra, sort of effort, keenness that you're putting into that. And so the result of asana is that you're not affected as much by the pairs of opposites, heat and cold, happiness and sadness, pleasure and pain. You're kind of samatvam, as the Bhagavad Gita would say. You're middle, you're in the middle. you're not really moved by something very easily. You're not affected by it. So tato dvandva, the duals, the opposites. And the next thing here is tasmin sati shvasa prashvasa. So this is very important. According to Patanjali, right? And the many commentators that follow afterwards in this tradition, after asana is established, after the body becomes light, sattvika nature, after the body becomes light, then pranayama, one is qualified for pranayama, breath restraint. One of the exercises, anuloma viloma, right? Various sort of practices here. One, you can do pranayama at the same time as asana, but here it's clearly saying tasmin sati. Once your body has become fit for asana, pranayama is enhanced. Your sort of breathing practices are enhanced. The body has to be light for your breath to be, proper. If it's sort of heavy and tamasika in nature, and the food that you're eating is very heavy, like fried foods, etc., the breath is going to be affected. So this whole idea here of getting that asana and then going into pranayama in that way. So there's a sort of sequence. So again, you have a light body, which results in a sort of breath, right? The ability to breathe properly or to control that breathing process, right? Which has a plethora of psychological effects, right? That are mentioned in psychological studies today. And this then leads to the next limb of dharana, attention. So your mind has thousands of thoughts that are happening. To get into a meditative state, you have to pick one thing to focus on out of the 100 things and keep focusing on that thing and intensifying to reach samadhi. That's the sort of pathway here. But in order to do that, you have to have your breath in control, because we'll see the next verse, but your breath in control allows you to get control of your mind, your body, then your breath, and then your mind sequence. In another text called the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, chale vate chale chittab nischale nischalam bhavet yogi sthanutvam apnoti tato vayum nirodhayet. Right? When the breath is disturbed, the mind is disturbed. Chale vate chale chittam. When the breath is steady, the mind is steady. Nischale nischalam bhavet. In a steady mind, the yogi attains firmness. Thus, the yogi should restrain the breath. So this text is providing evidence here that the mind is directly linked to the breath, the quality of the mind, how your breathing processes are, and your breathing processes depend on your asana practice. So there's a sort of link here that needs to be done in this way in a practical sense. So I will maybe go for another 10 minutes. Is that okay, Balwan? Or okay, because I want to make sure the buddhi question is answered. There's so much to talk about, but anyway. So dharana, desha bandhascha chittasya dharana. So the next limb, right? Concentration. It's fixing the mind on a specific place or an object. So for instance, if my mind is full of all these different thoughts, right? I need to pick something to focus on. Let's say I choose the moon, say M equals the moon. So I look down there and I see, let's say these are my thoughts: moon, work, moon, food, sex, sleep, moon, food. I'm in meditation and these are a sequence of my thoughts happening in this way, right? Dharana is taking the object of the moon and trying your best to make the moon become more frequent in the sequence of your thoughts. That's how yoga is sort of attained in samadhi, in that direction. But if your body and your breath are not fit, you will see that the moon will rarely appear in the sequence of your thoughts, or the desired object of meditation will rarely appear in the sequence of your thoughts. That's a psychological framework in that way. So for that reason, you need an alambana, a mental support. Among the thousands of thoughts that you have, you need to have some sort of a mental support, like the moon, God, or like a flower, anything that you want to focus on. You fixate on that image to achieve ekagra, one-pointedness. And eventually what will happen is dhyana. There will be an intensification of that object in your mind, the image of that object in your mind. So it will be like moon, food, moon, work, moon, food. More moons will appear, whatever it is, like the picture of a god, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It will keep appearing more frequently. Finally, samadhi is when the mind is sort of empty in its contents. And it's as if it is the same thing as the image, the very image that you were meditating on. Your mind is consumed by only that image. So it's moon, 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 complete flow and meditative state. This is attained in meditation. This is what's done when you're chanting, going Om, Om, because Patanjali ascribes Om meditation as the sort of way to do this. Mindfulness, I think it's implied, but it's hard. He doesn't really outrightly say that mindfulness is something that's there. It seems to be implied. There is a certain strict Om meditation practice that's involved in this. So Samadhi is when there's no tip. Mostly there's two types of Samadhi. We'll go into that later, hopefully. But Samadhi is when the mind is empty of vrittis or fluctuations. But there's one left in this case, and that's only the image of the moon. Completely absorbed, one-pointed mind. And again, all this is directly linked to your asana practice. Your asana practice helps you achieve this goal, which then helps you refine the buddhi, which this individual was talking about. So we won't talk about Ishvara, God, here. We'll skip that for now. So there is a section on God in the Yoga Sutra. And there is Om. Om is prescribed here. By chanting Om, you must chant it and contemplate on it. That's the sort of way to meditate, according to Patanjali. There's more information. How do you deal with people? Towards happy people, how do you act? Towards people who are mean, how do you act? Towards virtuous people, how do you act? There's more information like that there. More things about mindset. Okay, Sankhya Karika. Let me just briefly discuss this so then we could. So much important information you have to choose between it. All right. Okay. Since she asked about the buddhi, let's discuss this. Now, again, the metaphysics, Purusha and Prakriti, pure consciousness and material nature, right? Pure consciousness is observing material nature is changing, blah, 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 doing its thing, right? So the mind that you have, the chitta in yoga, the chitta is material, right? It has all the fluctuations in it. But the sister school of yoga called Sankhya, right, is so deep because it's a metaphysical school. It will describe the sections of the mind. And so there are three sections of the mind: the buddhi, the ahankara, and the manas. So buddhi, right, is the ascertaining and discriminating faculty of the mind. It's the sort of thing or process that makes you know something for certain, what it is. And it also makes you discriminate between Purusha and Prakriti. Its sole feature is, this is the main component here. If you want something that will help you attain the goal of yoga, to know the difference between soul and matter, to really discriminate, right, between the two, it's the buddhi. The buddhi has to be very refined and pure through practice. So for instance, if I want to, okay, I'll explain that later. But the main thing to know here, and free will, the argument is that free will comes from the intellect. Free will, your decision-making process comes from the intellect. That's why in Indian culture, if you make a mistake, your parents will yell at you. They'll be like, you don't have a buddhi, you don't have an intellect. Where is it? They don't say you don't have an intellect, and they don't say that, but what they're trying to say is your decision-making ability, your discrimination, your ascertainment is not good. And that is what needs to be refined through your diet, through your practice, through your sort of stuff like that, and why this is important, like in terms of ahimsa, violence and celibacy, it's because these things consume us. They consume the senses. And the whole idea is to, in yoga, to remove yourself from attachment to the senses. But anyway, the next part of the mind is the ahankara, the I-ness, the ego. This is the thing that says I as an identity, that thinks it's separate from the rest of reality. So myself as Hemal, I am entitled to this, I am that. I'm walking, I see a tree and I'm like, oh, that tree is beautiful, that tree is ugly, that tree is this, judging reality and whatnot. This is my individual I that thinks that it's separate from the rest of the world. And that's the second part of the mind, the ahankara, the ego. In yoga, it was called asmita, right? So yeah, I'm just going to say the last one. And the last part is the manas. The manas, the last part of the mind, the manas is just the calculating faculty. It's just deliberation. I have to do this, I have to do that, that needs to be done. What are ways to do this? It's a calculating sort of, I say the logical mind in some way. So with all three together, what happens is, if I turn and I look outside, the first thing that happens is the senses contact the sense objects, then vision, right, sort of like comes in, and then it contacts the manas. And the manas says, the mind says, right, this sort of mind says, something is seen, right? Then it goes to the ahankara. I see something. So something is seen by the manas. I see something. And then the buddhi says, oh, I see a tree. Identifies it for certain what it is. That's how the mind works according to Sankhya and Yoga in this sort of order. And today, if you study neuroscience, and there's sort of these like compatible processes that, of course, we're looking at different areas of the brain, but they integrate in some way, which is attention filtering. So one can say this is sort of attention filtering here.
Oh,
yeah,
I understand it a little better.
That's good.
Yeah, because my teacher always says, pretend it's an ocean and a drop escapes from that ocean, and the drop says, what? And then the drop says, who said what?
Oh,
I said what?
interesting.
Those are all the different stages or all the different pieces. And he's trying to explain, and I'm like, it's like the drop escapes. What? Who said what? I said what?
Yeah.
Right? So it's all those different, the buddhi, the ego, the ahamkara.
Right.
Yeah, it's very difficult to wrap your head around, but I think you just made sense of it for me. Thank you.
That's good. Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'll just let me just see if there's a conclusion. Yeah, okay. So let me just conclude, because I've said a lot. Okay. And so can Indian philosophy and texts enhance your practices? I'm saying yes. Right? I'm saying yes. And I'm saying how is, first of all, you know exactly what yoga is saying. And when I say what yoga is saying, I mean strictly the parampara, shastra, tradition, the Vedic tradition that has been passed down from guru to disciple, from Brahmins to lineage, that has not been distorted over time. This is what I mean by what yoga is saying, not other interpretations outside of different time periods and different places. I am open to these, but there's a sort of strict traditional way. It's important to identify at least what are they saying, And so you know what this tradition is rooted in, what your practices are rooted in, then you can choose kind of what you want to do. So you get a clarity of what the Vedic tradition is saying. And by doing so, you know what the ideals and the goals are, Look, honestly, it's my thing. I would say, like, look, what your ideals are. I think that's a gift. You know what these ideals are. You know what to strive for. Then you decide if you can make it or if you can't. If you can't make it, and be honest, say, I can't make it. Or like, I don't agree with the ideals, etc. But you know what the ideals are. Stilling the mind, steadiness, stability, easy, sort of an ease here, asana practice, om chanting, sort of, it's all clear there, right? So also, in psychology, we have what is called the interaction effect, right? So sort of like, I guess, or in many things, right? So you can't have like, if you take an Advil and you take something else, and it interacts and it can cause a problem. So you should kind of not mix things and stuff, right? But whatever it is it's interacting. So it's very important to understand that it's not just asana. Asana paired with meditation, paired with the proper diet, paired with pranayama, paired with, if you choose to accept celibacy or at least some control over your sexual organs, right, your desires and stuff, all of this together interacts and enhances your practice, right? That's what the argument here would be. Teaches you how to meditate. It makes you aware of your vrittis, right? Now you know that, okay, oh, this is right knowledge, this is wrong knowledge, this is memory, right, by studying the Shastra. And yeah, so I'm going to leave it at that. There's a lot more to say. Yeah, thank you. And I guess I'll just say that if you do want to learn more, there are certain books that I would certainly recommend. I do have a YouTube channel, the Academy of Indian Philosophy. I do have a website as well, the Academy of Indian Philosophy.com. I do personal tutoring. I teach Sanskrit, yoga philosophy, Sankhya philosophy, and the Gita, etc. So, and I also, again, my viewpoint is staying with the tradition and then looking at modern psychological studies and comparing them. So that's where my perspective is. So you're free, feel free to sort of contact me through email, etc. So yeah, thank you everybody for this opportunity.
Can you put your information in the chat?
Yeah.
Yes.
And what's the difference between the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and the Patanjali Sutra
Yeah.
text?
The Hatha Yoga Pradipika comes about 1,000 years later, 800 years later. It's different format in terms of its writing. Hatha Yoga Pradipika is more practice. Like it tells you, here's this asana, that asana, right? So it's something that you would really like if you're a practitioner in that way. It tells you all the asanas. It tells you the ways to do pranayama. It's more of an instruction manual. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra can be an instruction manual, but it has a lot of metaphysics behind it. And it's much older. So yeah.
People usually read the Patanjali Sutras before the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. It's sort of like it's like a guide to the Pradipika, sort of.
I think people read the Yoga Sutras because I think that it became popularized by Swami Vivekananda and various sort of gurus and swamis over the past like 50 years, 60, 70 years, I guess. It became popular. The Yoga Sutra actually was not used as much for many, many years, from at least from 300 CE onwards. It wasn't used that much. It became popularized by people. Swamis and gurus say, here's this text, use this, and everyone starts going into it, saying this is the answer to yoga, which could be, right? But there are also other texts. So there's many other texts, Yoga Vasishta, etc., Yoga Sara Sangraha. So for your sake, if you want to practice asana and you want to have a sort of traditional understanding of it, of course, you go to a studio, preferably with someone who has this traditional backing or who understands certain things or has that training. But also, you can read the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. You can read that. You can see what is pranayama, what does it say? And then the Yoga Sutra will give you an idea of the sort of practices and philosophies behind it. Why are we doing this? But if you read the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, I would say kind of have an instructor, have a teacher, have a guru, because some of these practices are, it actually says in the text, some of these practices are not to be done by oneself. There should be a sort of teacher in that way. So was that?
That's
Hemal,
the most authentic way to practice Hatha Yoga, is to do it alongside of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika text.
Yeah, and definitely, and whatever Krishnamacharya and Iyengar and all these teachers are saying, I wouldn't completely depend on the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, again, because it's like 16th century, right? So it's like, again, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika is actually a secret text. It says in there that in the second chapter, first chapter, do not give this teaching out to people. Its potency gets removed its potency decreases when you tell everybody about it. And later on, it says like, some of these practices are detrimental if not done correctly. That's their statement. I don't know if it's true or not, but I would prefer to read alongside with it, see what Krishnamacharya, all the yoga teachers are saying, what your teachers are saying, and integrate it in that way. That's what I would say.
One second.
Yeah.
Before you go, so can you be available same time on last week of May, like 29th, 4 p.m. we are all here. I can create this event, so you will find this on workshop, under workshop, and same way sign up here. Can you check your calendar, and then we all are here. So guys, what subject you would like to, let's say, if he's available, I can check the dates and time, but you see that you will find this information, his next event there. And do you have any particular subject you're kind of excited
I would
about?
like to hear the continuation of this lecture.
Sure, there's a lot to say. Sure. Yeah,
And can you guys please invite some other Hemal, you're going to school, or I can check with, we can charge very small amount if you like, whichever, like that's up to you guys or audience. So you can check. I think this time is good, right, everyone? This 4 p.m. start time, Saturday. Perfect. So you will find one more time here under, so home, their online classes, and under workshop. Earlier it was under event section, but there are lots of events, so you can find it easy. This will be under workshop. So there are only two events listed here. I listed here already just now. This is on 29th. In case you just sign up, in case there is a change, then you will see the email. So www.yogatalk.com, and we discussed already that it will be the continuation. And then please invite more people. It's just we are trying to find people like Hemal who are talented. If you know someone who is kind of really belongs to this place, then introduce us. And there are a lot. Deborah is here, Bev, team. Karan, I'm not sure if he's out. And Vinod, say hello to, he's a part of our team.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah,
It's
so we're
Vinod
trying
here.
to kind of build this community,
Yeah, thanks.
bring the talent to you guys.
What's your email,
Thank you,
Hemal?
Himal. It was so good,
Yeah,
so good and informative. Thank you so much.
my pleasure, my pleasure. Let me just put email. Okay. So. Do you have like a mailing list, Balwan, or something that you could?
Yes, and I will. So info@yogatalk.com is our email. Then we can write Hemal even, and then any information Hemal you will give us. Then we can. Oh, there was some question actually. Ruth was asking that all this information you were talking today, there is some way we can maybe print it or some electronic.
I can definitely try to do that. Yeah, I'll definitely try. I'll make like a sort of outline or something.
Perfect.
Let me just write this. Academy.
Himal,
Yeah.
do you do the topic of, do you do anything on the topic of guru?
How? What do you mean? How so?
Because I think that in the West it's gotten a bad rap, and I was wondering if you speak on that topic at all.
Yeah, like in terms of well, I would have to prepare it, but I have been to India several times and studied under a guru in Vrindavan and different places, and there is a certain authority that gurus need, according to the tradition, that they need to have in order to teach. So you kind of hold them accountable by seeing how their actions are in comparison to the ideals of the text. So they can't just say anything or do anything. They're part of a lineage in that way. So I could talk about that if you want to. I think
Definitely tied into lineage. Yeah,
because I think it's important for people to be able to discriminate who to follow and who not to follow, because there are a lot of false gurus out there and people do get tricked by that. So I think it's important to definitely know, what one perceives to be a true guru or not. So I think that's an important topic. Sure. So yeah, I put in my email. It's the Academy of Indian Philosophy @gmail.com. And the YouTube is Academy of Indian Philosophy. And the website is, if you guys could guess, academyofindian.com. So yeah, whatever you want to do, Balwan, if you want to ask questions or on whatever you want to do.
We want you in life. Just, this event will go. It's like it's lots of, and it's a satsang, so you need like, you know, so that's what, you know, doesn't matter what subject we are talking, but I think it's the buddhi, the intellect, I think needs to hear this again and again.
Pleasure. Yeah, I would be happy to do another talk. Thank you guys for being.
Guys, please invite your friends to these events. And then we have done this retreat, if you guys want to see us kind of in person. So it is 20th of May. So this will be under retreat section. It's in Joshua Park. So we have just posted it. We posted it today. So there are 4 spots they already booked, and just any other question last before? So Hemal, can you be available on this next? We can check on everybody's here and now, May 29th, same time.
Yeah, it should be available then. It's no problem. Saturday evening time. Yeah.
Guys, same way you earlier booked yourself, so you will get the Zoom link, and please invite your friends. And we can take 1-2 questions last before.
I have one. Hemal, what are your favorite Yoga Sutra lines? Maybe next time I go on my yoga mat, I'll think about you, and then I want to say those words out.
Okay. Well, that's a very good question. I do like the one that I put up with the Vairagya one, Paravairagya, Tat Param Purusha Khyatir. You know, when you are completely detached from the fundamental nature of everything, like the Prakriti, then you become detached from it. And that happens from perception of the soul. I do like Abhyasa Vairagya Abhyam. You know, you can still your mind through practice and dispassion. And you know, honestly, I do like the celibacy verse. Brahmacharya pratisthayam virya labhaha. When you are established in celibacy, great power and strength emerges in the individual. I think that's very interesting. I think that's something that a lot of people, including myself and everyone, we struggle with these sort of desires. And I think that's this culture is very much rooted in that, absorbed in that. And so it's very interesting. It's kind of retaking and repositioning your strength, controlling your senses. Anything that has to do with controlling the senses, I really like. Do you have any favorite verses or sutras?
I think your first one was similar to Vritti Savrupya Itratra.
Right.
So I say that out actually, you know, on some of my personal yoga practices.
Right.
Yeah, the first one was very similar to that.
Right, the fourth, Vritti Sarupya. Right. Otherwise, you're absorbed in the fluctuations of the mind. Exactly. Also very good. And there's another one. This one's very Asteya Pratishtayam Sarva Ratnani, something like that. It's like when you don't steal or you no longer want anything, then all the jewels and gems come to you. I love this because it's like
beautiful.
Yeah, we're always craving and wanting things, and it kind of pushes us away from it. But in fact, it's like the person who says, you know what, I don't need this anymore. Then all of a sudden you're showered with it. And that's this very opposite thinking to today's society where it's like, go get it, go get it, go get it. Now it's like, I'm good. And then suddenly, you know, that person contacts you or that job contacts you or something. Not to say don't put effort into it, but I like that one a lot. So.
I do want to give you a compliment on motivating me personally, that I'm much more intrigued and interested in knowing, memorizing some more, and you know, getting some more sutras in my personal favorites. So I know it will help a lot, and you know, will make my practice much more fun and enjoyable.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks.
So officially, I think we can now wrap it. We'll over. Say thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Look forward to see you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.